Hello everyone. In this video, I am going to demonstrate how to configure an Arista switch to work with ISE for dot1x authentication. In this particular case, using the TEAP protocol. Let's go to the topology. I have a Windows server here. This is running Active Directory services, certificate services, and also some group policies. I'm not going to get into detail on how to configure the group policies or set up the Active Directory server, but I'm going to leave the links on the comments below. These links will take you to the website to show you how to configure the dot1x settings for the endpoints and also how to configure the group policies and also the certificate templates. All right, I'm going to review the settings for ISE. This is going to be quick. So let's go to ISE. Here, the first thing that we need to do is to add dictionary, right? So we need to go here, work centers, and dictionaries. Here, go to System, scroll all the way down till you find Radius vendors, and you can see my dictionary, it's already here because I already loaded. So you can see there's a vendor ID. Oops. The vendor ID is here. We have the dictionary attributes in here. So how do I do this? Well, you're gonna find it on the links that I'm gonna leave in the comments below. Basically, you just to copy and paste the information, put it on a notepad, save the notepad, and later on import that notepad here, or that file pretty much, into the dictionaries. Okay, the second thing will be to add a network profile, and this is gonna be for the Arista switch. Let's close this window and let's go to it's administration, network device profiles. And here you can see that we have the Arista switch. Be clicking here. So you can do whatever name you have, but something meaningful for you guys. So you can do the Arista switch name, and then select Radius TACAX, Radius dictionaries Arista. Then go to authentication authorization. You can see wired map, Radius NAS port type, Ethernet, Radius service type, call check. And then we have dot1x settings, Radius NAS port type Ethernet, Radius service type frame, and wire web authentication, Arista web out, and equals 1. And then you see host lookup, or what is the same as math. We have selected process host lookup, PAP ASCII, and check calling station ID equals MAC address. And again, all this information is based on the attributes that the Arista switches send. We have the permissions, set VLAN, IETF, dot1x, set ACL, radius, filter ID. The change of authorization, just make sure you have the ports for radius 3799, change of authorization port 2083, click send message authenticator. I have make it work without this check, but it doesn't hurt. Disconnect, check RFC 5176, nothing here. Port bounce equals Arista port flop equals 1, port shutdown equals 10, re-authenticate Arista action equals 1, rerun AV pair subscriber command re-authenticate, and second Arista AV pair is re-authenticate type rerun. And then we have last AV pair re-authenticate, and the second one is type equals last. For the change of authorization push, select RFC 5176, the redirect, session ID, URL, redirect, redirect URL parameters, client IP, client MAC, and session ID. And finally, once you have all these settings, you can click on generate policy elements. This is going to generate different policy elements than the ones that we have by default on ISE. Like we have dot1x. I think it's wired dot1x. Let's go and check. Work centers, dictionary. I don't think it's dictionaries. It is actually conditions. So if we go to conditions, we're going to see the default ones, like wire 802.1x, and also the wire map, right? So when you generate the conditions based on the network device profile for Arista, is going to generate these ones. As you can see here, we have the wire 802.1x Arista switch, and also the wire map Arista switch. So this one and this one. And we're going to be using these two conditions to build our policies. Then we need to add the device into the network devices. So as you can see here, my device is already added. So I have Arista switch here. I call it, or I name it Arista switch 1. I have the IP address. Let's go into it. So you have to select the device profile, right? You need to make sure you are selecting the profile that you just built. Otherwise, it won't work. And then you have other settings in here, like the network device group, locations, IPsec, device type. So here on device type, this one needs to match, right? So device type, is the switch, so it has to match. The other setting is the radius authentication settings. So make sure you put the right password because this password has to match but what we have on the switch. So let's take a look here. So you see I'm using test 123, nothing fancy. It's just for testing purposes. Make sure that you're using the same change of authorization port. And that's pretty much it. We don't care about SNMP settings. I mean, we care if we want to do like on production environment, like configure SNMP settings and all that. TAC axis, we're using device management. But for testing purposes and dot1x, that's all we need. So let's go to the new network device list. And then the next step will be to create the policies. So if we go to policy sets, as you can see, I have a few policies here, one for Cisco, one for Arista, and this is the one that we care. So the first thing is to put a name for your policy. You can add a new policy right here. You see, new policy set. In this case, I have the policy already built, so I'm just not gonna go into that. So the name, the conditions, and here's very important because here in the conditions, that's where I am using the conditions that I already created on the network device profile, right? So I have arista.1x or map. As you can see here, this Arista condition is built based on two of the conditions created on the network device profile. As you can see, we have dot1x Arista switch and wire map Arista switch. Besides of that, I am using a device type equals Arista. Why I do have that? Well, because on my topology, I have two switches. I mean, three switches actually. I have this Cisco switching here. So I have this Cisco, these are Cisco, and this is the important one because this is my Arista switch. And that's the reason I have built the policy making reference to the network device type, because these two type Cisco and this one type Arista. So I'm just making a difference, right, on the policies. So this device is going to hit Arista. These two devices are going to hit the Cisco policies. But if you only have one device and you're testing, or your environment is only Arista, you don't need to add that into the policy. You only need to put the Arista dot1x or math. That's it. But anyways, let's go into the policy. We have authentication. So we have wire 802.1x and also wire map Arista switch. So we care about dot1x for this video. And then you select your internal identity store. In my case, I created an identity store called my AD. The options that I have is if authentication fails, continue. If user not found, continue. If process failed, drop. I've seen that many people use reject, reject, drop. I mean, and that's fine. But if we are building a policy for TEAP, right? If we're building TEAP, ideally, we need to do continue, continue, drop. Why? This is the why. Because if we go to the authorization policy here, so we can see how the policies are built. So for TEAP, we have user and computer, computer only, and user only. As far as I have tested, the order doesn't matter. Because with TEAP, we are doing heap chaining. So basically, we are authenticated user and computer on a single radius session. So what we're gonna do is once the computer boots up, it's gonna hit user and it's gonna hit computer only. Once you log in or the user logged in and enter the credentials, it's gonna hit the user only, and right away it's gonna hit the user and computer. Why? Because these two are getting chained once the user enter credentials, and it's gonna hit the tier rule, which is user and computer. And that's the reason on the authentication policy, we need to have if authentication failed, continue, user not found, continue, and if process failed, drop. So that is how we're gonna build our policies. Now, besides of this, on the conditions, we need to add the wire 802.1x Arista switch condition. Basically, that's how we're going to build our authorization policies. All right, now that you've seen how to create all those settings and ISE, policies, network device profile, dictionary attributes, and conditions, then next step will be to configure the switch. So here my topology, this is my Arista switch. So here the configuration that we need to put is configure the radius server. As you can see, radius server, timeout, radius server host, the IP address of my ISE, server, the key that I'm gonna use. It's encrypted, of course, type 7. It's just test 123, nothing fancy. AAA group server radius size group, and the server is. If you have worked with Cisco, you can tell it's identical. So let's click OK. And then let's configure the AAA commands. As you can see here, we are adding AAA authentication dot1x default group ISE. This is our server, our radio server, which is ISE. AAA authentication policy on success log, on failure log, no AAA authorization config commands, and AAA accounting dot1x default start stop group ISE. And then the dot1x settings. Dot1x settings, as you can see here, and click OK. The Mac-based authentication, I mean, you can play with that. I'm just putting a delay of 1 second, but if you're gonna have an IP phone and a computer connected to the phone on the same switch port, I will use a delay a little bit longer, probably, I don't know, 5, 10 seconds. You can play with those numbers based on how it works on your environment, right? But again, since this is used for testing purposes or labbing, I'm just doing 1 second. And then we need to configure other dot1x commands that are very similar to Cisco. Also on the switch, we need an IP address, of course, on the switch itself, so it can communicate with our radius and our Active Directory server. So that one is already configured. So this is the IP address that I have configured. Finally, we need to configure the switch ports, Ethernet 2 and Ethernet 3. As you can see here, I have the description, very, like I would say, identical to Cisco. Switch port access, the VLAN 10. I am only using one VLAN here. dot1x PAE authenticator, dot1x authentication failure action traffic allow VLAN 10. This command is gonna put the switch port on VLAN 10 in case it fails authentication. I know it's the same VLAN that I'm using for my production lab, but of course on production, real production environments, you can have a different VLAN, like a quarantine VLAN. I don't know, like you can use VLAN 50, VLAN 150, VLAN 250, whatever number of VLAN you want. But again, this is a lab. We have dot1x reauthentication command, port control auto, same as Cisco. We're using multi-host like Cisco. Well, you can do multi-host or multi-auth, but in this case we're using this dot1x Mac-based authentication to do math. And I have timeouts here, timeout periods. I have 10 and idle as 20. But again, you can play with those numbers based on the behavior that you see on your network. I have the dot1x reauthorization request limit 10. You can play with that number as well. So I'm gonna click OK. So let's do show run section dot1x. You can see my commands in here, dot1x, triple authentication, and switch port commands. And that's pretty much it. Let's see if it works. Let's go back to ISE, operations, live logs. Let's go back to my topology. I'm gonna click start. Okay, the Windows endpoint is booting up. Let's take a look at the live logs. And you can see here our endpoint just authenticated. So you can see the endpoint is hitting the policies. Let me make this bigger. It's hitting the TEAP computer only. And once we log in, we should see the user and computer policy being hit. So all right, you see, we're hitting the TEAP user and computer policy. Successfully authenticated. User A1 is basically admin1. domain is danoslab.local because I'm using Active Directory. That's my domain. You can see the name of the computer there, and also the username. And you can see here on the logs as well, the one is supplicant authenticated, supplicant with identity, anonymous, MAC address, and dynamic VLAN successfully authenticated on port Ethernet 2. It's working now. We can test MAV as well. I mean, the configuration of the switch port is pretty much the same. Our endpoint is based on MAV. In this case, I'm using a Linux server, very basic, not dot1x. So let's do it. Conf interface it to no shut. Oops, it's the E3. All right, came up right away. And let's turn it on. And you can see here, it's already authenticated. The one is supplicant authenticated. This is the MAC address. And on port 3, let's go to logs. There you go. We have the MAC address. It's hitting the map policy with the wire Arista map authorization policy. So let's take a look actually at the map policy. So it's pretty much the same policy that we're using for dot1x, right? Remember, we have Arista dot1x or map. So it's either or. For the authentication policy, again, is a wire map Arista switch condition generated on the network device profile. And for the authorization policy, I have my map policy here. I'm using the condition for Arista, wire map Arista. In this particular case, I'm using an identity group. So what I did is to add the MAC address on the Linux identity group. This for profiling purposes. So if we go to work centers, identity group, search for Linux, you can see my MAC address is already here. I manually add the MAC address. Of course, you can do your profiling policies better so that it does it automatically, right? Based on the attribute values sent by the endpoints, ICE is going to identify these attributes. It's going to put the device into a specific identity group or logical profile, and based on that, you can build your conditions. But I did it manually for testing purposes. And the MAV authorization policy. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Now you know it, and see you next time.